Jaime Harrison, who is now chair of the DNC, says the party's reputation with its base is not great and that Dems should appeal more to rural and working class Americans. In the New Abnormal podcast, he even said the party must battle the damage done to the brand using the word tarnished.
Interesting. Back with us to discuss Democratic strategist, owner of JC Strategies, Jennifer Holsworth-Karp, and Rachel Bovard, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Jen, let me start with you. I'm curious to what you think. This is quite a shot across the bow because Jaime Harrison included AOC. Well, he didn't include her by name, but definitely was alluding to her in terms of what he was saying there. And I see a lot of internecine warfare here in terms of the battles over Nevada. Who's going to go first? Iowa is almost certainly not going to be there, whether it's going to be Nevada, and some impetus to try and change what the calendar date looks like. As all of these discussions are happening, what do you make of his comments in that context?
Yeah, I mean, Democrats are extraordinary at admitting defeat when they've won things. And I think this is one of those times. Are there problems in terms of our messaging? Absolutely. I alluded in the last segment that some of Donald Trump's policies were exceedingly popular, over 60% with the electorate. So I think the Democrats really need to take a look at themselves in terms of how they're selling things. But in terms of the party reputation, sloganeering was not really a great thing to do headed into the 2020 election, especially when we had such a great opportunity to win when the Republican Party was giving us, Donald Trump as the leader of their party and QAnon as their party platform. I think that progressives and centrists and all of the span of the Democratic Party were actually able to put their differences aside, work together, and AOC was a leader in that. So I don't know why now would be a time for the chairman to sort of go after the quote unquote progressive wing or left wing of the party. It seems like things are working pretty well. On the other hand, I think the core of what the chairman was getting at is correct. We have some real problems in terms of appeal. We have some real problems in terms of policy, and we need to understand how to bridge that. We need to understand and explain the regional and the geographical differences in Democratic politics and speak to a message that is going to help all of them, not just one faction or the other. I think it was an inartful way to explain it, but at the end of the day, the core of that message absolutely rings true.
So Harrison and all the other establishment Dems, and we saw this immediately after the 2020 election, they want to pin every Democratic problem on defund the police. And look, I actually support the policy goal of defund the police, but I do recognize that the slogan and the policy in a lot of ways is wildly unpopular, okay? So they have a grain of truth there. But Rachel, the reality is the overwhelming losses for Democrats in rural America and with working class voters came under the Obama administration before defund the police ever broke into national consciousness. That is the era in which slowly Democrats lost the House, the Senate, and ultimately the presidency, lost state houses across the country, lost 1,000+ state legislative seats, and no one seems to want to dig into why that happened. They just want to use this one unpopular slogan to try to blame all of their problems on the left of the party, when the reality is things that the left of the party does support, like a $15 minimum wage, like universal health care, like a larger infrastructure package than what they're proposing, are actually extremely popular. So it's a very convenient narrative that takes any sort of criticism or self-examination of what their approach has been in politics completely off the table.
This is what both establishment ends of each party do, right? They cling to the thing that's easiest to dump on. For the Republicans, it's Trump the person. For Democrats, it's the sort of sloganeering of, defund the police and, socialism and all these things. But to your point, both parties have huge systemic flaws in their broad policy proposals. And that's the donor class of these parties, right, is who they're actually trying not to offend. And I think if there is truly going to be a realignment in our politics, and by that I mean sort of economics takes a much more central place in the policy focus of both parties, this sort of excuse baiting has to end. But again, this is how the establishment sides of the party make money, right? They cling to these things and they say, well, it's that, ignoring the broad sort of sweeping factors that have to be addressed if you truly are going to speak to the base of your party. This is where the Republicans have this problem just as much as the Democrats. And, again, it goes to these entrenched interests, I think, in Washington that will look for any reason
right.
to avoid any sort of self-reflection.
I just saw, Rachel, a claim from Liz Cheney that she's being vindicated because Matt Gaetz is. And I'm like,
I almost
right.
was going to mention Liz Cheney. I almost was going to do it, and I was like, don't do it, don't do it,
This is
don't do
a
it.
Liz Cheney fire zone here, okay? Always feel free.
It's also a Matt Gaetz fire zone.
Also a Matt Gaetz. We are not mutually exclusive. Jen, I am curious. I'm curious from your response there to Crystal on that, because there is a lot obviously going on here. We actually covered the story yesterday about all these Democrats who are blue dogs who got checks from AOC who are freaking out because they don't want her money and they're afraid that they're going to get attacked. Then this kind of intra-warfare seems very, look, again, I'm one-sided. I'm saying I'm outsider here, but it does seem very one-sided in terms of what it is when loyalty is certainly demanded from the progressive wing of the party, or they are just absolutely, destroyed in the public square.
Right. Well, I think there's a perception here and a reality, right? The perception nationwide, and it is one that is pushed by the media, is that, AOC is to blame for a lot of the losses. Defund the police is to blame for a lot of the losses. There's a shred of truth to that. And it's because I obviously have policy differences with the Congresswoman. I've discussed them on the show, but she is used in a lot of campaigns by Republicans in order to scare the electorate. Even if the policies that she's talking about are popular. That is the reality on the ground. And that is not a reality that we can ignore when we're running campaigns in areas that do not have constant exposure to what the Congresswoman is talking about. Even though
Jen,
obviously
let me just pause you on
Sure,
that, because I think you're right, and I don't disagree with what you've said. But I think it's noteworthy that there are actually far more ads that are attacking people for being tied to Nancy Pelosi. But we don't hear about that. Somehow that is never what Jaime Harrison or any of the other establishment Dems ultimately are talking about.
Here's the difference, though, Crystal. When Nancy Pelosi sees those ads, she tells the individuals running in those districts, run against me if you have to. Go ahead. Say that I'm the devil. Say you're not going to vote for me for leader. Go ahead and do what you have to do to get elected. There is a perception among a lot of folks in the party that if they are not in complete lockstep with progressive policies, they're called establishment, they're called a corporatist, they're attacked online, they're told to boycott the election, right? So there is a problem on both sides in terms of demanding purity in policy. That, I think, is what gets us in trouble, and that has a lot more to do with us than how Republicans are running elections in those districts.
Yeah, really interesting points from both of you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Great to see you both.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, Ryan Grimm. He's going to fill us in on some questionable moves over at the DCCC. That's when Rising continues.